welcome back to Franklin Covey's twice weekly podcast on Leadership with Scott Miller. I'm your host and interviewer each week, 6 years now, nearly 400 episodes, where on Tuesdays and Fridays we curate and release individual episodes, both in audio and video formats, to help you become a better leader. That's the mission of the Franklin Covey Company, the world's most trusted leadership firm, where we're able to take our spotlight and shine it on thought leaders from all walks of life, all designed to make you a better leader, to make you more effective. Of course, our co-founder was Stephen R. Covey, who wrote the seminal book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And some weeks we interview inside thought leaders from the Franklin Covey family, people like Chris McChesney or Corey Kogan or Stephen M.R. Covey, who wrote seminal books around trust, the speed of trust, and trust and inspire. Other episodes, we interview and highlight people outside of the firm, people who we think have done research, invented, created, sometimes survived an experience that helps make you better at whatever role is most important to you. Now, as you probably know, almost all of our interviews are done virtually. About once a year, we have a guest that is willing to stop by and is here in town. And today, we have an in-person guest live in studio, and also someone who kind of straddles both sides of the Franklin Covey fence. Anne Chow. You know her, of course, of the best-selling book, The Leader's Guide to Unconscious Bias, a new book that Franklin Covey released about 3 to 4 years ago. And now Anne Chow is coming back for her new release book out today called Lead Bigger. The tagline is The Transformative Power of Inclusion. Anne Chow, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Scott. It's wonderful to be here.
Now, I introduced you as kind of 2 feet in the boat, so to speak,
Yes.
because you're both a Franklin Covey colleague,
Yes.
and you are an outside thought leader. Reintroduce yourself, if you will, to all of our guests and viewers. What is your role at Franklin Covey? And I'm also going to ask you to rewind after that and talk about your professional journey, some of the things you've accomplished in your own career.
Yeah, thanks so much, Scott. And it's really a pleasure to be here on this very, very big day. At least it's big in my
Launch
view.
day.
Right? Yeah, launch day. So my role at Franklin Covey is I'm a very proud member on the board of directors. I've been on the board now upwards of almost 9 years. And since 2022, I've actually been the lead independent director on the board. And it's really been a pleasure supporting the mission and the purpose of the company, getting to work with so many incredibly brilliant people. And so that's been my role at Franklin Covey, for which I'm very, very grateful.
You're also doing other things right now as well. So let's talk about what's going on in your broader professional world. You're married, you have 2 daughters that are launching into the world, you help take care of your parents, there's a lot going on, but also you have a lot of professional engagements. Update us on what's going on with you professionally.
Yeah, absolutely. So Scott, the last time I was with you, actually here, right in the studio, I was working at AT&T. And so I worked at AT&T for over 32 years. Right. That is where my corporate business journey started way back in 1990, actually, so people can do the math and reverse engineer that. But now I am in a stage of my career that I call my rewirement. So I retired from AT&T after an amazing career at...
and retired in what role?
So I retired as the CEO of AT&T Business, which is, at the time, AT&T's operating unit supporting businesses all around the world. It was a $35 billion unit. I had responsibility to support 35,000 people around the globe. And so it was an incredible experience. I was appointed to that role in 2019. I retired from AT&T in 2022.
And I read once where it was the equivalent of a Fortune 100 company?
Yes, that's right. So at the time when I was there, it was in fact the size of a Fortune 100 company. And so incredible responsibility, incredible work that my team did in support of customers. During that period of time, we'll all recall, even though it seems like decades ago, was COVID. Right, it was the run-up to outbreak thereof, and then the chaos and the all of the things that ensued all around the world. So that was the role that I retired out of.
And right now, you're doing a couple of things. You are adjunct faculty at Northwestern.
Yes,
right?
That's right.
Teaching graduate programs there.
Yep. So I'm a senior fellow and adjunct professor at Kellogg. The Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern, and so I teach executive ed programs as well as some EMBA students along the way. So that's been part of my rewirement.
Yeah, and you live in Dallas and it's in Chicago, so you're back and forth with some frequency.
Yes, we actually have 3 campuses in Evanston, Chicago, and Miami.
I see.
have been toggling across those 3 locations.
That's great. Miami's great in the winter.
It is.
And Evanston is great in the summer.
Yeah, indeed it is.
And you have a couple other things going on too. Talk about some of your board appointments.
Yeah, sure. So in addition to serving on the board of Franklin Covey, I'm fortunate to serve on the board of 3M, a global material science innovation company that serves both businesses and consumers across different industries.
Post-it notes?
Yes.
Amongst other things,
yes,
I know.
I'm a heavy user. I'm a frequent flyer of those products.
Yeah.
I also recently, earlier this year, was appointed to the board of CSX, which is a Class 1 freight railway based east of the Mississippi, over 26 states. Joined that board as well. So I've got a great board portfolio, teach, and it's really good to stay productive.
And somehow you wrote a book in the midst of all of that. This is why you called it your rewirement, not your retirement, because you should retire from anything.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't consider my career over by any stretch. I'm just in a new chapter, very intentionally and purposefully, that involves what I like to call the portfolio life.
Yes. Rewind a little bit even further, because you have an interesting background in terms of your affinity for music, your education. Talk a little bit about maybe the high school, college realm, and we'll dive into the book.
Yeah, sure. Sounds great. So I am a proud second-generation American. My parents immigrated to the U.S. in the 60s from their native country of Taiwan. And so I was raised very, perhaps stereotypically, to be excellent at music, to be excellent at academics, to pursue sports, and to pursue science and math especially. So I did. As a child, I actually went to the pre-college division of the Juilliard School of Music in Manhattan, in New York City. Went there for 7 years.
Not a slacker to get into that.
Well, if you're going to do it, you might as well go, right? If you're going to do it, you might as well go big.
Go big or don't come.
That's right. But I realized that was not going to lead to a clear path to financial independence, quite frankly.
You weren't the next Condoleezza Rice of piano.
No, I was okay, but I was not great. Nor did I have a passion for it. In terms of performing in that way. So I went on to do what every logical person would do then, is I decided to study electrical engineering in college. So I started out my career as an electrical engineer, actually. And that's how I wound up at AT&T as a network engineer in my very, very first full-time professional role.
It's a remarkable journey. You very deliberately talk about your post-AT&T life as your rewirement.
Yes.
You have a website and you podcast a lot and are frequently talking about what that means. What's the difference between retirement and rewirement?
If you were to look up the definition of retirement, right, in any of the dictionaries, it would say an exit from the workforce. Okay, I absolutely
sounds
am
appealing.
Not. Well, to some maybe, right? I think very practically speaking, right, and I know Scott, that you're also a proud Gen Xer, right? As am I. I was not ready to leave the workforce, but I wanted to have a different kind of impact than the one that I had had for 32 plus years in working for one company. I felt that I have been given this gift of a set of experiences, the gift of relationships and networks all around the world from a B2B, business to business standpoint, and I wanted to purposely be part of the workforce in a very different way. For some people, that is going into nonprofit. For some people, it's the portfolio life like I'm doing. For some people, it's teaching.
Mentoring, all
right,
kinds of things.
Right. For some, it's involves much more time with family, right, and friends and community. So that's the difference. To me, rewirement is about very much purposefully, intentionally thinking about your impact and building a life around that, right? And so while I don't like to use the word busy because it doesn't necessarily mean positive things, right? I like to use the word productive, and I find myself incredibly productive today, right?
I've known you for almost a decade from your association at Franklin Covey, and I find you to be very deliberate in all that you do. There's nothing accidental about you, and I like the differentiation between busy and productive.
Yes.
Let's talk about your latest project.
Yes.
Oh, and by the way, you wrote your second book. So you were a co-author on the book, The Leader's Guide to Unconscious Bias. It was extraordinarily well received by the world, been translated into several languages, and Franklin Covey also developed a solution out of it that was implemented by thousands of organizations through our All Access Pass. Since then, you wrote a book independent of Franklin Covey, complementary to our reputation, but outside of the organization. You've called it Lead Bigger, the Transformative Power of Inclusion. Of all the topics you could have pointed your bat at and said, yes, I'm going to write a second book, that's not an easy decision, and about this topic, why was this your passion?
So, Scott, I will completely admit and confess to you that the idea of writing my first solo book is extremely daunting, right? And I still can't quite believe that it's there, right? That I did it, that we did it, that the team and I did it, if you will, because there was a team of people who supported me and helped me along the way.
As is the case with any project in life, right?
Anything that's worth doing, right, is worth doing with people, for people, right? So the reason why I chose this topic, and the reason why I felt so strongly of wanting to write my own book, it's been a bucket list item of mine, actually. I'm not as prolific as you are in terms of being able to write books, but I felt like I had something
that might be busy and productive, but go ahead.
No, I don't know about that.
Anyway.
Yeah, I would beg to differ. So I felt that I had something to say, and if I think about my own journey, right, this is not a memoir, by the way. This is a leadership book.
Clearly.
Okay? I would say that I have been and continue to be a student and practitioner of leadership. Okay? You were very, very kind enough to compliment the career that I had at AT&T, which was 17 different roles and 26 different bosses. We talked a little bit about my career today and the different involvement I have. Leadership has been around me, has been infused in me, has been developed with me, for me, in support of me, by me, throughout the entire journey. And I have a very strong point of view about what leadership is and what it should be. In fact, when we were thinking about the title, right, about the book, it really struck me that we are often told to think bigger, right? I mean, it's often the kitschy thing that we're told. You have got to think bigger, right? If your business is not growing today, you've got to think bigger. If you want to innovate more creatively and outpace your competition, you have to think bigger. When we're children, right, we're told that you've got to dream bigger, right? But neither dreaming bigger nor thinking bigger will yield anything unless you actually lead bigger. Leadership is about action. And so that is really the reason why I wrote this book. And one of the questions that I have gotten throughout my career, and even to this day at this stage of my career, is how did you do it, right? What were your keys to success? And this book, in a way, is my translation of how I led in a much more practical way, right? With a framework and tips of how I did it. I led bigger, and I approached the topic of inclusion in a much more broader and strategic way, even before I knew that's what it was. I led inclusively.
And you have the designation as an Asian American leader at AT&T, I believe, of being the first.
Yeah, so I was the first woman of color CEO in AT&T's history. 140 plus, pushing 150 years. I was the first woman to be appointed as the CEO of AT&T Business. And so, not by any necessarily intention, but I have often been the first or the only. So this notion of inclusion is one that hits very home to me. Right.
And I'm sure in your life you know a lot about exclusion and how to not be included and how to build a culture of inclusion. The tagline of your book is the transformative power of inclusion.
Yeah.
I'll bet that conjures up a notion for a lot of people based on their paradigm.
Yes, 100%.
Let's talk about what might be the elephant in the room. And when I say room, I mean like society.
Yeah.
And that is the state of DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yes.
Everyone has an opinion about it socially, politically, environmentally, professionally. What's your opinion on kind of where it is? What's the state of DE&I right now? Because you actually talk about inclusion, and you may actually have a little bit of a twist on that.
I absolutely do. So I will say about this book is a leadership book. It is not a DEI book. There is a delineation. And that was very intentional on my part. I actually have a very strong opinion about the acronym DEI, and I'm happy to share it with you because I think it will help inform.
Please do, because I think people will be interested to know just that.
Yes, and I think it will help inform my drive, my passion to reframe inclusion. So diversity, equity, inclusion, as you pointed out, 3 very different words, albeit interrelated, depending on how you process and internalize them, right? Here's what diversity is. Diversity just is. Diversity is happening all around us, right? The world is changing. Technology is helping to catalyze changes. With every ensuing generation becomes more diverse, right? There are many, infinite, if you will, facets of what diversity is. I call them dimensions in the book, right? Different attributes, different dimensions of who we each are. And diversity is just a reality. It just is. So you can choose to ignore it at your own peril, or you can choose to embrace it and lean into it and take advantage of it, quite frankly, and leverage it to the benefit of your group, your team, your organization, as a leader, as a true inclusive leader. So diversity is just a reality, okay? That's how I feel about it. I'm very pragmatic about it. Equity. Equity is an outcome, right? So what does equity mean to me? Equity is just simply about fairness, all right? It's about, do we have, as a leader, let's say as a leader in business, are we providing all of our employees equitable access to healthcare, right? As a member of the community and somebody who was in the networking and communications business for over 3 decades, does our community have equitable access to broadband services and the internet, right? It's actually called closing the digital divide, right? Because we know today that healthcare and education are all hubbed around access to the internet, right? That is what is transforming society today, right? What this technology has done. Do we have, in the context of, let's say, an HR professional or leaders within an organization, does every one of your employees have equitable, fair access to promotional opportunities, right? Do potential candidates that are interested in working for you have fair and equitable access to be hired by your company, okay? So it's just simply about fairness. You know, I have a saying that I also mentioned in the book that my kids are so sick of hearing, okay? I don't think I've used it on them recently, given their ages and heading into young adulthood, but certainly when they were younger. And that is that fair is not equal, okay? We all come into this world in a different place with different attributes, characteristics, whether it's socioeconomic status, geography, or otherwise, right? And equity is about fairness. It's about fairness in outcomes, okay? So you have to really decide as a leader, what is equity important? Is fairness important? And is it fairness for whom, right? You could even apply it to your customer set, right? Does every one of your target customers, whether they're, in my case, a small business right around the corner that doesn't have a lot of capital, to a global multinational company, do they have equitable access to an excellent customer experience provided by your firm, right? It doesn't mean that they will have equal levels of support or technology or resources, but do they have equitable access to what you would consider, and they would consider importantly, an excellent customer experience? So that's equity. Inclusion is an action, in my view, right? Inclusion, when you think about the word inclusion and what it actually means, it requires that you think differently, that you make different decisions, that you behave differently, that you take different actions, right? To be inclusive is to do something, all right? And the reason why I wrote my book about inclusive leadership, and I'm calling it Leading Bigger, is I fundamentally believe that inclusion is one of the key competencies to be a leader in today's world and tomorrow's world. It is a necessary leadership competency for the modern world. And you can choose not to be an inclusive leader, or you can choose to lead inclusively only in certain situations, if you like, or with certain cohorts of people, all right? But I would venture to say that you will eventually lose to somebody who's truly leading inclusively in their work, workforce, and workplace. What I will also say about DEI, Scott, because that's kind of a long-winded way to share Anne's point of view about what DEI actually is, I actually think that the acronym has done a disservice to the power of what each of those things is, okay? And when we think about inclusion, I'll read a quote from the book. Inclusion itself has been made too small, stuck at the end of the DEI acronym, right? Inclusion is so much bigger. What DEI, what the DEI conversation has, I think, mistakenly been interpreted as is too narrow. It has been largely equated to issues of race and gender and representation solely, okay? Think about what I said about diversity. Diversity is infinite. It is ever evolving, right? It is the reality of the modern world. Choose to ignore it at your peril, right? And I also think that the DEI conversation has been narrowed by this topic of representation in the workforce, right? Inclusion, in my mind, needs to be applied, and this is actually my lead bigger framework, which really guides the book, is about applying inclusion and leading bigger in your work, with your workforce, and across your workplace. And it is the equal priority of those three things that enables you to lead bigger.
Let's, on that heels, talk about the workforce, the future of the workforce.
Yes.
I think you are young and relevant and wise. I think you are seasoned,
Is that because you're younger than me?
Barely. I think you are tested and seasoned. Honestly, I really think one of your key attributes is how relatable you are. You have your pulse on the zeitgeist of what's going on at the boardroom as well as the front line from a variety of the roles that you play. Let's talk about the future of the workforce. Younger, more adept, more flexible. Some might say more demanding. Some might say more entitled. There's arguably 4 to 5 different generations in a lot of different workforces.
That's right.
Let me rapid fire a couple of questions as it relates to the book Lead Bigger as a leadership book and the power of inclusion. What would you say are the key attributes that the future workforce contribute to organizations? We hear a lot of negative things about what they need and want and demand, but remind us of what they bring that our companies need.
Yes. So, Scott, I am the proud parent of 2 Gen Zers.
Right.
Okay. One is now fully in the workforce. The other one is about to enter the workforce next year. Okay. Knock on wood. So I have a firsthand front row seat to what you would call the future workforce, which I think is largely transforming, right? And it's forcing us to think about leadership differently. So I think it's a really great question. I think your kids are Gen Alpha, probably. Right?
Gen Alpha, exactly.
Gen Alpha,
That's
right?
Yeah.
Right. So here's
after their father, the Alpha.
The Alpha.
I thought it's kind of a strange name, Gen Alpha.
I know we won't have that debate right now, but
it's not that kind of Alpha.
I know that's right. That's right. So what the contemporary, let's call it the contemporary, because they are currently in the workforce today, right? So it's not even future; it's today, right? Gen Z is in the workforce today. What they bring to the table are many things, right?
Didn't live life without the internet.
That's right. They are techno, right? Technology is infused into who they are. Right. They live in a world, because they came into a world of ultimate transparency and access to real-time information, okay? They can figure anything out, right? They can get access to any questions that they may have, right, by themselves, right? Presuming they have the right tools and access to broadband services. So there's that. They also are not tied to hierarchy, right? They want and need things to be the way they should be, and they will not suffer fools gladly, okay? There is also a level of courage in what the younger, the more contemporary workforce
kind of unrecognizable for our generation.
Yeah, it really is, right? In a way that they're fearless, right? Because they have access to information and an understanding of what other jobs are out there, what other environments are out there, that there isn't this sense of, perhaps when you and I grew up, this idea that corporate loyalty, right? We want to go work at a place and work at that place for 30 plus years, right? That's not even an aspiration anymore.
I don't think they're less loyal. I think it's had better options.
I think they have better options, and they have greater clarity about what they want.
Well said.
Okay, so I do believe that they will, to my point of not suffering fools gladly, they do not have a fear of moving to something different if they don't feel that this role, this company culture fits with their value system, right?
You see these attributes as actually positives.
I absolutely do. Yeah. They will not, right? And there's plenty of data done by incredible organizations and people around this, right? Topics like sustainability in the environment and climate are viscerally important to them, right? The topic of DEI is important to many of them, right? They are the most diverse generation that have entered the workforce yet, right? And with every generation that enters the workforce, they become more and more diverse, right? They become more technology, just by simple definition. And so, and I don't mean simply gender and race, right? I mean diversity as a whole in terms of thinking and perspective. Yeah, right. And as a result, they can be incredibly innovative in helping us shape not only our products and services and experiences out there, but our cultures more foundationally, right? And I think one thing, Scott, that the conversation of workforce does not take into account, and this is why in my book I have this framework of workforce, and workplace, is the younger workforce is also becoming our contemporary client set, the new investors, right, the new shareholders, right, the new customer set, the new partners, the new suppliers to all of us. And so this is not only a question, right? The imperative, all your
stakeholders.
Right, exactly. The imperative of inclusion is not only one for your workforce, which is where the majority of the current conversation has been had, right? It's much, much broader in terms of how the world is evolving, how the economy is evolving, how industries are evolving, how the nature of work is evolving.
When I have read your book, and as I'm listening to you, you really, Anne, are fundamentally changing the way we think about inclusion. Yeah. I think up until now, we've lumped it together with DE&I, diversity initiatives.
Yes.
And you're really talking about this being a leadership competency, this being a leadership 100%. Strategy.
Right.
Not just, like you said, with your employees, right, but in all your stakeholders, because your suppliers and vendors are now also in their 20s and 30s.
That's right.
Your investors are in their 20s and 30s.
That's right. And your future investors, right?
That's right.
So absolutely.
That's right.
Yes.
Okay, so I want to go deeper on this because I think anybody that's leading a company, owns a company, on a board, executive leadership team, needs to heed your advice around how to lead bigger with the future of your workforce and your customers. You've mentioned a lot of attributes that you see as assets.
Yes.
What do you think the next generation, Gen Alpha, Gen X, what do they need to do differently? What do they need to learn differently to thrive in cultures that aren't moving as fast as they want them to? Maybe they don't understand the economics of the business, or they don't have the history, the backstory. They want change, they want promotions, they want to earn more. What do they, if you were speaking to the younger generation, what would you like them to be a little more patient about, a little more wiser about?
Yeah, I think you actually just hit on the word, right? And Alpha is not yet in the workforce, right? So I'm really talking about Z.
They are on YouTube. They're monetizing. They're monetizing lots of ways, right?
They're all on YouTube and the Gram.
Yes.
Right. I think one of the fascinating things is this aspiration by many to become an influencer and make their fortunes that way.
And create content.
Which has been done by many a people.
Millions.
Right? Okay. Now, whether that's sustainable, we'll see as time evolves. Yeah. So what I would say is, to the more contemporary workforce, I think there are really two things that would be my biggest advice to them. One is a word that you just said, which is patience, right? I would say that in today's world, and in the world that you grew up in, with instant gratification and transparency and, just squirrel, right? This kind of dynamic, patience, a little bit of patience is needed, right? Because even if things are not the way that you want for them to be, give it some time and work it, right? This is how you develop perseverance. This is how you develop grit. This is how you develop experience, right? One mistake that I see some people making is that they move too quickly. Now, granted, right, I actually talk about toxic work environments in the book. If you're in a toxic environment and it is harming you, right, your mental health, your physical health, you gotta get out.
You gotta get out.
Okay. But if it's not,
or either get out of that leadership,
that's
or
right,
get out
or
of
that
that
hierarchy or whatnot, right? You need to change your situation, right?
You don't always have to quit an organization.
Correct.
You can quit a leader.
That's right.
And still be passionate about the organization unless they're tolerating bad leadership.
That's right. Or you can go into some level of autopilot. I actually talk about this, as long as you have the support of your immediate leader to do so. Okay. So, so patience is one. I think the other one is, and it's very much interrelated, is that there is learning in everything, right? There is learning in every experience, every opportunity, every bad situation, every quote-unquote failure, and I don't believe in failure, I only believe in success and learning, right? Because you always get up and keep going, okay? So I actually think just failure, as people call it, is just simply part of the learning process, and that's kind of how I've led my career and gone through my career. So I would say learning can happen anywhere with anyone, right? I reflect back on the 26 bosses that I had, and I learned just as much from the top 3 as I did the bottom 3. Now, I was much more miserable with the bottom 3 than I was the top 3, but in hindsight, those experiences made me a better leader, right? They helped me to lead bigger in the sense that I saw how people reacted to things that I thought were not right? They did not align with my value system. So what I would say to the more contemporary workforce is lean into that discomfort, right? That discomfort means you're growing. It means you're learning. It means that you're developing some skill, some resilience that you did not have before, because anything that is worth pursuing is not going to be easy, right? I mean, I think it's a very, very low percentage of people who have easy journeys, right? And easy doesn't necessarily mean growth, right? And courage is the opposite of comfort, right? To quote Brene Brown, or to talk about Brene Brown's, what she talks about, and leaning into discomfort and viewing everything as a learning opportunity, I think is very important. I also think, because we are talking generations, that many companies too are gravitating to embracing the younger workforce, but looking to push the older workforce out. I think that's a mistake as well, right? I think that there's an incredible, beautiful thing that can happen in a high-performance culture with intergenerational collaboration and camaraderie. Yeah.
And close this topic out.
Yes,
Talk about what leaders
Yes.
that want to lead bigger
Yes.
will do through the lens of inclusion to engage and inspire and better ignite the talent and genius and patience
Yes.
that the future of the workforce has. Well, like, what
Yes.
do I need to do differently
Yes.
to lead a incoming 20-year-old that maybe I'm doing leading my peers or my own age group?
Yes, yes. So you got to talk to them, right? So in my view, the step number one is you need to put yourself in alongside them, right? You've got to gather them in groups. You've got to go out there and meet with people. You've got to listen with humility. You have to realize that as a leader that they are not you and you are not them, right? You got to put the hierarchy aside. You got to put hierarchy aside and realize that what they're bringing to the table and the perspectives they bring are nothing that you have currently, right? And this is a little bit uncomfortable for many. For some, it's very uncomfortable because we have been, in many ways, trained to say, hey, experience is where you're at, right? You need to have experience. With age comes tenure, and tenure is good, right? So I think really pushing yourself to be in their presence, be in their company, but also be vulnerable and listen, and whether that's with potential customers that you're looking to target, potential community members that you're looking to influence or engage their support of. If you're in a regulated industry, working with different constituents, right? Let's say that you're in a company that has a union population, partnership with a union, right? So this is not just your workforce, but it is absolutely vital with your workforce, right? And so that's the way you've got to do it. In many ways, you hearken back to, you got to lead from the front line, except in this case, the front line is that future workforce, that current workforce, that contemporary workforce. And take some risk, right? I would say you got to take some risk in staffing certain roles before you think they're ready, with this realization that no longer are you going to automatically get 10 years out of them, right? In terms of a grooming path of somebody's career progression. You may only have 2 years with them. You may only have 3 years with them. If that's the case, how do you accelerate that ramp to contribution and value and make it meaningful for you and meaningful for them? Scott, I'll just reference on this topic one of the chapters in my book. It's in the second section of the book, second part of the book about workforce. And it's the last chapter in the book, and I call it Vitality. And I've always referenced what some may call the employee life cycle. I've actually called it workforce vitality, ironically, through my whole career, because I never liked the notion of life cycle. It seems so transactional and stage-oriented, and there's a beginning and an end. I have a vitality framework that I cite in the book that I walk people through from, the positioning in the marketplace, from hiring to onboarding, to career planning and development, to performance management and development. And what's different about my approach, all right, my big idea around this is that it takes both the perspective of the leader, to your question, but also the perspective of the employee, the person, if you will, right? And I think that's very different because we're used to leading. People of our generation, our ilk perhaps, are largely used to leading with our own perspective, right? From the company's perspective, right. From the organization's perspective.
How we were led.
How we were led, right? Without, quite frankly, regard to that individual person's point of view about it. And that's what's fundamentally different.
It's been a massive change for me since reading your book to recognize how many mistakes I have made and how different my journey was, my upbringing, my parental situation, and changing my mindset, being a little more patient, accelerating someone's path.
Yes.
Just because it took me 7 years doesn't mean I have to weight them down with the same 7
That's
years.
right.
This idea of paying your dues.
That's right.
It's kind of an old term now.
A very old term.
Yeah. And it just speaks to the values of my generation.
Yes, our generation.
Our generation.
Yeah.
Let's talk about connection to purpose.
Sure.
It's kind of an ethereal concept, but it's no less vital.
Yes.
How practically do leaders who are leading bigger connect their people to the company's purpose? Because not every company, organization is really purpose-driven. I mean, I think you can say you are, but is your purpose Franklin Covey is a very noble purpose.
Yeah.
I don't know that every company's purpose is as tangible, as relatable, as practical. Yeah. How do leaders that lead bigger connect their teams to their company's purpose?
Yeah, I love that you led with this question because this is actually the first chapter of the book, right? After I provide my intro. So, the reason why I start with purpose is it must always start there, right? As leaders, our objective as leaders is to advance meaningful work, right? Since the beginning of time, leadership is the one thing that has transcended cultures, age, industry, technologies, right? And it is the one common thing that is required for progress is leadership, okay? So with that multi-century point of view, right, advancing meaningful work, purpose is about meaningful, okay? It's about that word meaningful, right? Advancing work, that's what, managers manage tasks, right? This is sort of an old cliche, right? Leaders lead people, right? That word meaningful is all about this connection to a higher cause, right? Now, to your point, not all organizations or companies have maybe what one might consider an inspiring purpose. I'd actually debate that, right? I would say that every organization, every team, not just company, right? Because my book is for both current leaders at any level as well as aspiring leaders, all right? So you don't have to be running a company because let's face it, most of us will never get a chance to run a company, right? But there are leaders everywhere, right? Leaders in the community, leaders in the school system, leaders in religion, leaders in politics, right? Leaders in business, of course, right? So purpose is about why you exist, right? And how leaders can determine what does that meaningful mean is one of the things that I would always do as I grew up as a leader was, because I wasn't a leader of a big unit or the company as a whole, I would try to understand the purpose of the company, the purpose of the bigger unit that I was in, but then I would always try to connect my work and the work of my team to that, right? And I have this rubric in my head about leading from the outside in and the inside out, and taking the outside in view of what's happening in the market, what's happening with your customers, what's happening with your competitors, what's happening socially, technologically, economically, politically around the world. How do you make that translation to your group, and how do you create a culture and an environment where there's deep connection to what your group does? Look, now, there are some jobs that may be viewed as rote or routine, right? And this is not to offend accountants, right? But some may view, hey, you have an accounting firm, or you run a tax group or an accounting group. How exciting can that be? Where's the purpose or the meaning in that? And when you think about it in terms of serving your shareholders or serving your investors or providing appropriate controls, right, for the performance of your company, these are vitally, vitally important roles, right, that if they didn't exist, and I think this is one of the key questions that I would ask leaders to ask themselves is, what would happen if your team did not exist, right? And that question in and of itself will help guide you to the journey of what is the meaning of your group? Why do you exist? Who would care if you did not exist? If you didn't do the work that you and your team are doing, what would happen? What processes would break? What stakeholders would be negatively impacted? And that's how you find your why, right? Which is what your purpose is really all about. But that's where it starts, quite frankly, as a leader.
Let's conclude our conversation about well-being.
Sure.
You write a lot about the connection between inclusion and well-being. I don't know of a leader of an organization that's not either been drawn to or led out on the need to have a focus on well-being of their employees. More and more responsibility, quite frankly, is being asked of and demanded of organizations to support their employees in their well-being. First of all, maybe define what well-being means, and what's the hard connection and maybe business case toward inclusion.
Yes. So this, the topic of well-being in the workforce and the workplace has largely evolved, hasn't it? Right, over the last couple of decades, and it has become increasingly important. And to our earlier part of our conversation about the more contemporary workforce, well-being is a priority. Okay, and I can fairly confidently say, Scott, when you and I were growing up through businesses, it wasn't.
It wasn't even a discussion.
Right. You had your work life and you had your home life. Okay.
And one better not bleed into the other.
That's right. And you purposely led your life separating the two. This is no longer the case, largely enabled by technology, right? But if there was any doubt about this, COVID happened and showed us that we only have one life. And we must figure out how to better integrate the personal aspects of our life and the professional aspects of our life, because we have one life. And my children, your children, understand this viscerally, and they will not tolerate a lack of this, right? Which leads us to this topic of well-being, right? And in my words, as I would always think of it, before well-being, the word became a thing, right, that leaders talked about, I always viewed, because I knew that it was true for myself, which was, if your people are not at their best as individuals, as humans, how can they perform at their best? It's really quite simple, right? As leaders, we are all about elevating the performance of individuals and elevating the performance of our teams, right? For the greater performance of whatever work, meaningful work we're advancing, right? So understanding what best means, right? And this gets the definition of well-being. Well-being is about physical well-being, mental well-being, emotional well-being, spiritual well-being to the extent that people, find spirituality important, whatever that means to them, financial well-being, okay, and other dimensions of well-being. But those are kind of, to me, sort of five anchor things in the scope of what well-being is. Now, I will say, because I have talked to many leaders, especially at this point in my career, who are very concerned about this topic because they feel unqualified, nor do they feel like it's their role to be their employees' therapists, okay? So that is not what this is, right? This is, as a bigger leader, as an inclusive leader, really understanding the boundaries of which you lead your people, the psychological safety and the safety of the environment of the workplace that you must create so people feel comfortable with risk-taking, so they can speak up. It has to do with your policies, your practices, your systems, right? Of things like caregiving or leaves, okay? So it's in all of the systems and practices and policies and how you behave of how you support the well-being of that employee, okay? And it is not only in times of good, but it's in times of bad, right? And this is, to our earlier comment about loyalty, how you build loyalty and connection, dare I say belonging with your employees in terms of, and your team members on what helps them thrive, okay? I don't think it's by accident that that's what Arianna Huffington calls her company, Thrive Global, right? And just kind of as a plug, as a thank you, the last section of my book features one-on-one conversations with General Stanley McChrystal, Ariana Huffington, and Adam Grant,
Wow.
as I felt it important to bring other voices and leaders who are very diverse in their backgrounds and perspectives, practitioners of leaderships as well as thought leaders of leadership, and they provide their views of what inclusion and inclusivity is, right? And so well-being is a topic that's here to stay. Scott, I'll end my comments around well-being with the reality of today and tomorrow is that people are in jobs which are part of their careers, which are just simply part of their lives. And if you are a leader who only focuses on that person in their job, that person is going to eventually leave you, right? And it's more than just their career. You have to take the whole picture into mind and understand where they're coming from and where they need, both as a collective, your organization, your team, but importantly, as individuals and as humans. And so leading bigger is really about taking a very human-centered approach to leadership and applying inclusion, again, in your work, workforce, and workplace.
And as you can see from the set behind me, I've met a few authors in my day.
Yes, indeed, you have.
And every author has a vision for how they'd like their reader to absorb their book.
Yes.
When you think about an organization, leaders, aspiring leaders, current leaders, legacy leaving leaders, how do you want people to experience your book? Like, do you see executive leadership teams doing a book club around it? Do you see people how do you want people to experience Lead Bigger?
The answer is yes, Scott, right? So being a leader that has always been centered around people and the humanity of people, I would love for this book to be considered, read, ingested, embraced, however that individual feels best for them. I think it is a book that will help people reframe what inclusion is. I hope that the book is both timely and timeless. And Scott, I will say that we know the world is more interconnected today than it has ever been, but yet the reality of today's world has a high degree of polarization and divisiveness around it, right? I'm one who believes that leadership is a privilege, it is a responsibility, it is a choice, and it is a joy, right? But to lead inclusively requires that you lead all of the people that you're responsible for in your ecosystem, not just some of them. And that requires an incredible intentionality and focus on individuals and groups that may not be part of your experience set or purview, right? And that takes incredible courage. So yes, I hope that there are many book clubs. I hope that organizations will look to engage me to help them with the conversation. I hope both current and aspiring leaders pick this book up and glean something from it that they can practice more amply. Like I said, I fancy myself a lifetime student and practitioner of leadership, and that is how I have had my life's journey thus far. I believe that it is one of the purposes of why I was put on this earth, and I'm so humbled and honored to have had the opportunity to share my thoughts with my readers and listeners.
I know you are an avid kickboxer. You're also going to need to have one of those hand muscle builders because you're going to be signing a lot of books in the coming years.
Yeah, one can help. Yeah, I don't kick anymore, but I still do fitness boxing because old people and hips and stuff.
I hear you. But work on your hamstrings and signing books. Yeah. And I'm not sure you set out for this to be the goal, but I think this book is going to propel you as a key voice in the world on how to lead the future workforce. I think you're going to become either accidentally or deservedly, both perhaps, as a key leader helping companies take otherwise competent leaders and help to transform them and how to lead bigger, how to understand the power The Transformative Power of Inclusion.
Yeah.
Your book is out today.
Yes.
The title is Lead Bigger by Simon & Schuster. Although I have it in paperback, it's actually
Yes.
a pre-advanced copy. It's being released in both hardcover, audio. You're
Yes.
reading the audiobook.
I am reading it myself.
And
Yes.
daunting. And I see on social media you've just completed that, and also in digital format as well.
Yes.
So great success to you. Delighted to have you back, and perhaps
Thank
you'll
you
be
so
back
much.
here in studio for whatever follows. Whatever book is the third one that follows in a couple of years on
Okay.
Lead Bigger. Thanks for your time, man.
Thank you so much, Scott.
And we'll see you back here next week for a new conversation on leadership.